Marcus Reed kept both hands on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, trying not to look at the red and blue lights strobing across the inside of his windshield. The Starbucks cup in the holder had gone cold. A drop of coffee slid down the lid, slow and stubborn, and he watched it like it could explain what was happening. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer said, voice flat, like he was reading it off a laminated card. Marcus swallowed. His throat felt too dry for such a simple motion. He glanced at the phone again. One new text. The screen lit up just enough for him to see the sender. Director's office. His heart didn't race like in movies. It sank. Heavy. Like he already knew the next 5 minutes were going to change his life in a way he couldn't change. He put the car in park. And he opened the door. The stop happened on Route 50 outside Arlington, Virginia, where the road always felt half like a highway and half like a long hallway leading back into the city. It was late afternoon, not quite rush hour, but the air had that tiredness that comes before everyone tries to go home at once. Marcus had left a plain office building with mirrored windows and a lobby that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. He drove a grey Accord that didn't draw attention, because that was the point. Marcus looked like someone you'd pass in a grocery store and forget 5 seconds later. 39, medium height, clean haircut, simple button-down shirt. No flashy watch. No big energy. He didn't like being noticed, and most of his adult life had been built around that. But today, his chest felt tight before the lights even came on. It had started earlier, in the morning, when he stood in his kitchen and stared at a letter he already knew the contents of. The envelope from the mortgage company had that window cut out, showing his name and address like a polite warning. He didn't open it right away. He made coffee first, like a ritual could delay reality. The coffee maker gurgled, and the sound filled the silence that used to be filled by another person's footsteps. His wife, Tasha, had moved out 5 months ago. Not in a dramatic way. No screaming. No broken plates. Just exhaustion and distance that grew until it became a separate address. She took the good blender and the framed picture of them at a beach in North Carolina, both of them squinting at the sun like nothing could touch them. Now the kitchen table had one chair on the side Marcus used. The other chair stayed pushed in, neat, like the house still hoped for her to return. Marcus opened the letter and read the numbers he already knew were there. Behind. Late fees. A warning about next steps. The words were professional, almost gentle, and that made him angrier than if they were cruel. He set the letter down and looked out the window at his neighbor's yard. A kid's bike lay on its side near a sprinkler. He remembered being 12, thinking adulthood meant you always knew what to do. He almost laughed at that, but it came out like a breath. He tried to call Tasha that morning, not because he wanted to argue, but because he wanted to ask if she could meet for coffee, talk like normal people, maybe figure out some version of peace. The phone rang and rang. No answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. He didn't want his voice to sound needy, even though he was. Needy was a word he hated. It tasted like weakness. He put on his badge in the same quiet way he always did. It stayed hidden in his jacket, not because he was ashamed, but because his job wasn't the kind that needed a spotlight. Most days, he was grateful for that. It let him stay just Marcus. At the office, people nodded at him in the hallway, respectful and careful. They didn't know what his mornings looked like. They didn't know he'd sat in his car the day before, parked in the grocery store lot, trying to talk himself into walking in and buying the cheapest version of everything. They didn't know he'd skipped his therapy appointment last week because he couldn't handle hearing himself talk about his feelings out loud, again. He knew that was part of his problem. He was good at managing systems, reading patterns, tracking what people hid behind their words. He could handle pressure. He could handle leadership. He could handle a room full of people watching him. But he didn't know how to handle his own loneliness without turning it into a job. Around noon, he went downstairs for coffee. There was a small cafe near the building that served decent sandwiches and always got his name wrong. He used to correct them. Now he didn't. It felt like too much energy. He paid, took the cup, and stood near the window for a minute, watching people move down the sidewalk with earbuds and purpose. 2 women in scrubs laughed about something, leaning close. A man with a lanyard and a gym bag checked his phone and frowned. A delivery driver double-parked and jogged inside with a stack of boxes. Everyone looked like they belonged somewhere. Marcus felt like he was floating between places. Like he belonged to his job, but not to his life. His phone buzzed while he was still in the cafe. A text from his deputy assistant, short and clinical. Need you to sign off on the briefing memo today. Also, the community oversight meeting got moved to tomorrow. Marcus stared at the message and felt the familiar pull. Duty, duty, duty. He typed back, got it, and he meant it. Then he left the cafe and drove back toward the office. That was when the lights came on behind him. At first, he assumed the officer wanted to get around him. It happened sometimes. Arlington traffic was a mess. But the police cruiser tucked in close, and the lights stayed on. The siren chirped once, sharp. Marcus pulled over, slow and careful, the way he'd taught new agents to do in training. No sudden moves, no confusion, keep things calm. He turned off the engine and put the keys on the dashboard where they could be seen. He lowered the window. The officer walked up like he already knew the ending of this story. White male, maybe mid-30s, clean uniform, mirrored sunglasses even though the sun was low. The officer's jaw worked slightly, like he was chewing something invisible. License and registration, the officer said. Marcus handed them over. His hands were steady, but his stomach wasn't. He had lived in this country long enough to know the rules didn't always apply the same way to everyone. The officer glanced at Marcus's license and paused. Just a fraction of a second. Enough for Marcus to notice. Where you headed? The officer asked. Home, Marcus said. Just left work. What kind of work? Marcus hesitated, then chose the safest truth. Federal. The officer's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Federal, huh? Marcus kept his voice even. Is there a problem, officer? You were drifting between lanes, the officer said, looking past Marcus into the back seat like he expected to find something. And your taillights out. Marcus knew his taillights were fine. He checked them last week when his inspection was due. But he didn't argue. Arguing never helped. The officer stepped back. I'm going to take a look around your vehicle. Marcus's pulse rose, finally. Am I being detained? Or can I go? The officer's sunglasses reflected Marcus's face back at him, small and distorted. Step out of the car. Marcus's phone buzzed again in the console. He didn't touch it. He didn't want the officer to think he was reaching for anything. Officer, Marcus said, quietly, I'd like to understand what's happening. The officer leaned closer, voice low enough to feel personal. What's happening is you're going to cooperate. You people always think you can talk your way out of everything. Marcus didn't flinch, but something in him went cold. He heard the words like a slap, not loud, not dramatic, just ugly in its certainty. The kind of sentence that carried years inside it. Marcus stepped out of the car. He stood on the shoulder with cars rushing by, wind tugging at his jacket, his cold coffee smell still clinging to his shirt. The officer opened the driver's side door and started looking. It wasn't a real search. It was theater. The officer moved too confidently, too quickly, like he already knew what he planned to find. Marcus's mind ran through options. Call his attorney. Request a supervisor. Stay calm. Document everything. Breathe. Then he saw it. The officer's hand slipped toward the side pocket of the door, and for a split second, Marcus noticed something small in the officer's palm. A little baggie, pinched between fingers like it weighed nothing at all. Marcus's chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. No, Marcus said, the word coming out before he could stop it. Not loud. Not a shout. Just a broken piece of truth. The officer looked back at him, head tilted, like Marcus had just confirmed something. And in that moment, Marcus understood exactly how easy it could be for a lie to become his whole life. His phone buzzed again. Director's office. Marcus stared at the officer's hand, then at his own phone, then at the traffic flying by like nothing mattered. He thought of his empty kitchen table. He thought of Tasha not answering. He thought of all the times he told himself he was safe because he followed rules. And he realized rules were only as real as the people enforcing them. The officer straightened up and turned around slowly, holding the small bag just low enough that Marcus could see it clearly, just high enough that it could become evidence. Funny, the officer said, voice calm, almost pleased. Looks like we've got a problem after all. Marcus swallowed, forcing his breath to stay steady, but his eyes burned. Because if he said who he really was right now, it might save him. And if he said who he really was right now, it might not save him at all. He took one step forward, then stopped. His phone buzzed again, like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. And Marcus had to decide what kind of man he was going to be in the next 10 seconds. Marcus didn't say who he was. That choice sat in his chest like a held breath while the officer walked back toward the cruiser with the small bag in his hand. The world didn't pause. Cars kept rushing by. A delivery truck rattled past, wind pushing against Marcus's legs. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Normal life kept going. The officer returned with a clipboard and a tone that had shifted just enough to feel official. I'm going to need you to turn around, he said, already writing. Marcus did turn, slowly, hands visible, heart steady in a way that surprised him. He felt tired more than afraid. Tired of knowing how this could go. Tired of having to calculate every word. A woman's voice cut through the air. Hey. Both Marcus and the officer looked up. She stood a few feet away on the sidewalk, a paper grocery bag tucked against her hip. Late 50s maybe. Grey curls pulled back. A grocery store apron under her jacket. She looked like someone's aunt, someone who made casseroles and complained about her knees. I'm sorry, she said, holding up her free hand, but I saw you drop that. The officer frowned. This is a police stop. I know, she said calmly. I'm just saying, I watched you walk up to his car, and that thing in your hand wasn't there before. The officer's jaw tightened. You need to move along. She didn't. She shifted her weight instead. I live right there, she said, nodding toward an apartment building behind her. I was waiting for the crosswalk. I saw the whole thing. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. Not relief exactly. More like disbelief. The officer stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. This doesn't concern you. It does, she said. It concerns me when I see something wrong. For a moment, Marcus wanted to tell her to go. He didn't want her dragged into this. He didn't want her name written down or her night ruined. He didn't want another person paying for a system that chewed people up quietly. But she stayed. A second cruiser pulled up then, slower, the lights less aggressive. Another officer stepped out. Younger. Black. His eyes flicked between Marcus, the first officer, and the woman on the sidewalk. He took in the scene without speaking. What's going on? The second officer asked. The first officer answered quickly, too quickly. Routine stop. Suspect had narcotics in the vehicle. The younger officer looked at Marcus. Really looked at him. His clean shoes. His steady posture. The way his hands were open and still. The woman spoke again. That's not what happened. The first officer shot her a look. I saw him take it out of his own pocket, she said. Her voice shook just a little now, but she didn't back down. I know what I saw. The younger officer hesitated. Just a beat. Enough for Marcus to notice. Sir, the younger officer said to Marcus, do you have any weapons on you? No, Marcus said. I don't. Any reason for us to search your vehicle? Marcus took a breath. I do not consent to a search. The first officer laughed under his breath. That's cute. The younger officer didn't laugh. He looked back at his partner. We should call this in, he said. Get a supervisor. The first officer's face flushed. We don't need. I think we do, the younger officer said, firmer now. Silence stretched. The first officer stared at Marcus, then at the woman, then at the traffic like it might give him an answer. Finally, he muttered something and grabbed his radio. While they waited, the woman stepped a little closer to Marcus, careful not to cross any invisible lines. You okay? She asked softly. Marcus nodded, though his throat was tight. Thank you, he said. You didn't have to do that. She shrugged. I raised 2 boys, she said. I know when something doesn't sit right. They stood there together, strangers connected by a few minutes on the side of a road. Marcus's phone buzzed again. He glanced down. Another message from the same sender. Are you safe? Please call when you can. He slid the phone back into his pocket. Not yet. A supervisor arrived about 10 minutes later. Middle-aged. Calm. The kind of person who'd learned to read a scene before speaking. He listened to the first officer. Then to the younger officer. Then he turned to the woman and asked what she saw. She told him, clear and direct. The supervisor sighed, rubbing his forehead. All right, he said. Let's slow this down. The first officer protested, voice rising. The supervisor cut him off with a look. Sir, the supervisor said to Marcus, you're free to go. Marcus blinked. Just like that. For now, the supervisor said. There will be a review. Marcus nodded. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just felt heavy again, but in a different way. As he walked back to his car, the woman touched his arm lightly. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, Marcus replied. He got into his car and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. His hands shook now that it was over. Adrenaline catching up. He drove home in silence, the sky turning orange and grey. When he pulled into his driveway, he didn't go inside right away. He sat in the car and stared at his front door, thinking about how close everything had come to going wrong. Later that night, he finally called the number from his phone. Marcus, the voice on the other end said, tight with concern. Where are you? At home, he said. I'm okay. There was a pause. We heard about the stop. Marcus closed his eyes. Then you know why I didn't say anything. I do, the voice said. But you shouldn't have had to go through that. Marcus leaned his head back against the seat. I go through it every day, he said quietly. Just usually without witnesses. When the call ended, Marcus went inside and stood in his kitchen. The empty chair was still there. The mortgage letter sat where he'd left it. But now there was something else too. A small, stubborn sense that maybe he wasn't as alone as he'd convinced himself he was. And that scared him almost as much as it gave him hope. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling fan as it traced the same slow circle over and over. The house made its usual sounds settling into the night. A pipe clicked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed and then nothing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the officer's hand. The bag. The certainty in the man's posture. The casual confidence of someone who believed the story would bend around him. Marcus had spent his career studying power. How it worked. How it hid. How people justified what they did when they thought no one was watching. He taught others how to see patterns, how to question narratives, how to protect institutions from rot. And still, on the side of that road, he had felt small. Not weak. Small. At 3 a.m, he got up and went to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, barefoot on cold tile. The mortgage letter caught his eye again. He picked it up, folded it once, then unfolded it like that might change the words. He thought about calling Tasha. He even typed her name into his phone. But the idea of explaining this night, of admitting how shaken he was, felt like too much. He deleted the draft message and set the phone face down. In the morning, Marcus went to work like nothing had happened. That was his skill. Showing up. Wearing calm like armor. The building looked the same as always. Security nodded him through. Someone held the elevator door. A junior analyst smiled nervously and said good morning. But Marcus felt off balance, like his center of gravity had shifted overnight. In a meeting later that day, he found himself staring at a whiteboard without absorbing the words. Acronyms floated past him. Timelines. Action items. Someone asked him a direct question, and there was a half-second where his mind went blank. Marcus. He blinked. Sorry, he said. Go ahead. The room waited. He answered smoothly enough, but inside, something cracked. Not loudly. Just enough to let light in. After the meeting, his deputy assistant caught up with him in the hallway. You good? She asked. Yeah, Marcus said automatically. She studied him. You don't look it. He hesitated. He could feel the habit rising, the instinct to shut it down. Keep it professional. Keep it clean. I'm fine, he said again, firmer this time. She nodded, but the look didn't leave her eyes. At lunch, Marcus sat alone at his desk. He didn't open the document in front of him. Instead, he pulled up the internal incident reports. He searched keywords he knew too well. Complaints dismissed. Footage missing. Patterns buried under procedure. He told himself he was being objective, analytical. But his hands trembled on the mouse. The woman from the sidewalk came back to him. Her steady voice. The way she didn't flinch. He realized how rare that was. How much depended on chance. On who happened to be nearby. On who decided to speak. What if she hadn't been there? The thought sat heavy in his gut. That afternoon, Marcus drove past his usual exit on the way home. He didn't decide to. His body just did it. 10 minutes later, he was parked outside the small brick building where his therapist's office was. The sign was modest. No buzzwords. Just a name and a phone number. He hadn't been there in weeks. He sat in the car for a long time, engine off, hands resting in his lap. The urge to leave was strong. He didn't want to dig into this. He didn't want to admit how close he felt to unraveling. But he remembered the bag again. He got out of the car. The waiting room smelled like coffee and old books. A woman flipped through a magazine. Someone coughed softly behind a closed door. When Marcus's name was called, his chest tightened. He sat on the familiar couch, shoulders stiff. So, his therapist said gently, "What brought you in today?" Marcus stared at the floor. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "I almost lost everything yesterday." The words surprised him with how easily they came. He told her about the stop. About the officer. About the bag. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He just laid the facts out, one by one, like evidence. When he finished, the room felt quiet in a way that pressed in on him. "And what did you feel?" she asked. Marcus swallowed. "Anger," he said. "Shame. Fear." He paused. "And exhaustion." Exhaustion from what? He laughed once, short and humorless. "From carrying it," he said. "From always having to be careful. From knowing that who I am on paper doesn't protect me in real life." She nodded. "You didn't use your title." "No," Marcus said. "I didn't want to." "Why?" He thought about it. Really thought. "Because I wanted to know," he said slowly, "if I mattered without it." The truth of that landed hard. They sat with it. When Marcus left the office, the sun was low. He walked to his car feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Like he'd taken off armor and realized how bruised he was underneath. At home, he found a voicemail he'd missed. "Tasha." He listened twice. "Hey," her voice said, "careful. I heard something happened to you. I wanted to check in. Call me if you want." Marcus leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He didn't call her back right away. He wasn't ready to promise anything. He wasn't even sure what he wanted. But for the first time in months, he didn't feel completely cut off. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with the mortgage letter and a blank sheet of paper. He wrote down numbers. Options. Hard truths. He didn't solve everything. But he stopped pretending nothing was wrong. And that, he realized, was the real breaking point. The first thing Marcus did the next morning was open the blinds. Light spilled into the kitchen, pale and ordinary, falling across the table where the mortgage letter still sat. He didn't rush to move it. He made coffee instead. The machine whirred and clicked, familiar sounds that grounded him in the present. For the first time in days, his hands didn't shake. He sat down with the cup warming his palms and let himself just exist for a moment. No badge. No title. No strategy. Just a man in his own house, breathing. The problems didn't disappear overnight. The numbers on the page were still unforgiving. The silence from Tasha still hurt. The memory of the traffic stop still lived close to the surface. But something inside him had shifted, subtle but real. He was done carrying everything alone. Later that morning, Marcus made a call he'd been avoiding. The bank representative sounded tired but polite. They talked through options. Temporary relief. A payment plan. Nothing miraculous. Nothing easy. But it was a path, and paths mattered. When the call ended, Marcus felt a small, surprising sense of relief. Not because the problem was solved, but because he had faced it. That alone felt like a win. At work, he asked for a private meeting with his deputy assistant. She closed the door and waited. "I need to be honest with you," Marcus said. "About what happened. And about how I've been doing." He didn't give details he couldn't share, but he didn't hide either. He talked about pressure. About fatigue. About the cost of silence. She listened without interrupting. "I'm glad you told me," she said when he finished. "You don't have to be made of stone all the time." Marcus nodded. He didn't argue. He was starting to believe that. That afternoon, he approved a review of the traffic stop. Not quietly. Not aggressively. Properly. He insisted on transparency, on process, on accountability that didn't depend on who someone was or what they carried in their wallet. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't personal. It was necessary. On the drive home, Marcus stopped at the same cafe near his office. The barista smiled and asked for his name. "Marcus," he said. She wrote it correctly this time. He took his coffee and sat by the window, watching the city move. People hurried past with their own worries, their own invisible weights. He thought about the woman from the sidewalk, standing firm with nothing to gain. He wondered if she knew how much her small act had mattered. That evening, Marcus finally called Tasha. They didn't fix everything in one conversation. They didn't even talk long. They spoke carefully, honestly, like two people learning how to be human again without old expectations. "I'm trying," Marcus said at one point. "I see that," she replied. When the call ended, he felt sad. But he also felt real. Later, Marcus sat at the kitchen table again. He moved the empty chair closer. Not because someone was coming over, but because he was done pretending absence didn't exist. Before bed, he checked his phone one last time. No emergencies. No urgent messages. Just quiet. He lay down and slept. Not perfectly. Not deeply. But enough. In the weeks that followed, life didn't turn into a success story people would clap for. Some days were still heavy. Some nights were still long. But Marcus kept showing up. He kept asking for help when he needed it. He kept choosing honesty over endurance. And slowly, that added up. The small win wasn't justice or recognition or redemption. The small win was this: Marcus no longer measured his worth by how much he could endure in silence. He mattered even when he was tired. Even when he was scared. Even when no one knew his title. And maybe that was the lesson worth sharing. Because in a world that often tells people to stay quiet and carry on, sometimes the bravest thing is to speak, to ask, and to let yourself be seen. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts below. Maybe you've had a moment where silence cost you more than you realized. Maybe you're still standing at that breaking point. Your story matters too.